Welcome back to
Playing Commander with Anthony.
Doing episode 10 of the Glass Sign series. It's going to be a glass cannon.
Fire in the hole.
Okay, it took a pretty long time to resolve that Genesis Wave 437, so do you win now? Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. I'm your host, Andy. I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony. Glass Cannon. Oh, wait, what was the word I was going to use? It wasn't aficionado. Hold on a sec. Glass Cannon. Please hold.
Connoisseur.
Thank you. That was it. All right. Glass Cannon Connoisseur Maddox.
There's all kinds of ways that you can make a deck that's super explosive and tries to do one thing and then falls apart, usually most of the time. And I've tried many of them.
It occurs to me that some YouTuber has probably tried to make an actual glass cannon at this point, and now I'm going to look at that video later.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That feels, yeah.
YouTubers be doing everything dumb that don't make no sense.
Wasn't there a Mythbusters? They went really deep on like what
What's
qualifies a myth. They're just like, what's a thing people say that could be construed as thought to be real?
Myth. Glass cannons can't sink a ship.
Great question. I don't know. You put enough of them on there. It's probably going to get pretty heavy.
They did have a lot of seasons. They ran out of true myths at some point, and they were like, can you actually walk on hot coals like those guys do sometimes? Not a myth, strictly speaking, but you could just try if you want, I guess. This week on the show, we are doing something a little different. Anthony, we're going to talk about our approaches to building commander decks. You and I play Commander, as does the vast majority of Magic players, and I think the Commander map has us maybe a little excited about the format, a little energized about it lately, and so we're going to be diving into our approaches to building Commander decks, which I suspect will differ somewhat dramatically maybe from the consensus among Commander content creators, because we don't listen or watch any of that, save for the Guardian Project podcast.
I thought you were just going to say it's going to be very different between the two of us, which is what I was
that's also going to be different too.
It's interesting. This is not a thing we've talked about before. It just makes me realize that I should listen better and ask more questions. It's so easy to talk about people's decks and how we're playing Magic and be like, oh, I like that's cool, or that sucks, or what did you think about this card? And I've never just asked you, Andy, how do you choose what cards to put in your deck?
The good ones.
Yeah, great. But I kind of expect that your approach is going to be a little bit more formal. Is that an okay descriptor?
I don't know.
All right.
Before we dive in, let's just say that we're not doing a Pack 1 Pick 1 from a listener-submitted Cube this week on account of the fact that we're not talking about Cube, but there will be a special segment at the end of this episode where we are talking to John Terrell of Cultic Cube about the forthcoming CubeCon event. By the time this episode is in your podcatcher, I believe tickets should be on sale. So go check that out and listen to the end of the episode for a conversation with John where we will answer your most pressing CubeCon questions. I like us both having a deck in our hand to shuffle when we play. It occurs to me, like we talk about Cube so much, I'm not going to bring my whole cube over to your house just so I can shuffle some cards from my cube while we're talking. But a couple Commander decks, easy peasy.
Yeah, I mean, I am a little bit of a fidgeter sometimes, so I like to have, a nice mechanical pencil or some other object to fiddle with.
I'm a lot of bit of a fidgeter.
And we're talking about our Commander decks, so I just thought I'd bring along one of mine, just as a little talisman to shuffle while we're talking about Commander.
Can I propose a place to start, Anthony?
Yes.
I think you should speak on your thoughts about the idea of a Commander deck template. This is an idea I believe is pretty popular amongst, the Commander community. There's a lot of people that will say, oh, every deck has to have 10 ramp spells and 10 single target removal spells or whatever. I know that Command Zone has done episodes where they have laid out the Commander deck building template. And, I actually listened to that episode a while ago because I was referring Hillary to it when she got back into Commander, and I wanted to listen to it to see how decent the advice was. And they definitely couch it in like, this is just a template and every deck's going to be different. But what do you think of the idea of there being a template in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I listened to that episode as well, and I thought what was really interesting about it was how mostly they were talking about how they were changing their idea of the template and how much the format has changed. I thought there was a lot of value in that discussion.
Did they do two? Did they maybe do one originally and then like a couple years later revise
they did one
Commander
pretty
deck
recently,
template?
Yeah, I think, I say recently, probably in like the last year, they did a new
I didn't listen to that one. I'm thinking like 3 years ago probably, so.
But yeah, I think that for me, that's not necessarily my starting point, at least. I think as much as it is helpful just to sort of be like, okay, where is everybody at? Like, how many lands are you playing? How many removal spells are you playing? But when I'm building a deck, I'm much more focused in sort of what is the outcome that I want to have the deck to do? Like, what kind of gameplay am I looking for? What kinds of cards are exciting to me? So I'm much more focused on those aspects. And honestly, if that leads to more deck diversity, if I'm thinking, well, I want to have interactivity in all of my decks, but because this one is all about playing lots of creatures, can I make sure that that interactivity comes in the form of creatures, not necessarily just a suite of removal spells? Or maybe this deck just doesn't really care about what's on the board, so isn't going to play a lot of single target removal at all. So yeah, I would say it's helpful as sort of a litmus test, as a way to get a sense of what people are doing, but it's not something that I use myself.
I think they're helpful for exactly somebody that is like brand new to the format and just needs like a foothold, right? They need somewhere to start. You know, the same way we talk about like giving people somewhere to start cube designing. So as soon as they get their first couple drafts under their belt, they can start making changes based on their own preferences. I feel like if someone is paralyzed by indecision, they don't know how to start making their first commander deck, then sure, a template is a great starting point. But we know from firsthand experience that some people take these templates as not just a starting point, but as kind of the Bible of this format. I mean, our new favorite Reddit user, u/tanks and boobs with a Z, when we posted the commander map, went to great lengths to explain to us that actually a lot of these decks are terrible. They shouldn't even be considered commander decks. Every deck needs 10 ramp spells and 10 single target removal spells. And if you don't filter out decks that don't have those, then you're not getting good data. And it's like, I extremely disagree with that. Not just from a data science perspective of the idea of choosing what you think a good or bad deck is, but even more so from the idea that that's what a commander deck has to be viable, because I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah, I mean, just from what the commander map, not to go too deep on this, but just to talk about what I actually want the commander map to be, is a map of what people are actually doing, not like it's not a map to great deck building. It's not a map to how the decks should be optimized. It's a map
generally don't like to tell people what to do.
Definitely not. It's a map to what people are interested in, what they're doing. And if people are playing a bunch of decks that don't have enough lands and play way too many ramp spells or no removal, then that is something that I actually think is interesting and I want to reflect, because Commander is a casual format and it's about the creativity of the people building these decks.
Who would have thought u/tanks and boobs wouldn't be a wealth of good faith communication?
It's always still helpful to have the counterpoint, at least to sort of be a little bit self-reflective and think, oh, is this like, what is meaningful? I think it actually was helpful for me to think through. Yeah, we actually are trying to visualize the warts and all of this format. So when I'm building a new commander deck, and for context, we used to play a lot of commander, and I would build a new deck. Like, I feel like every month, maybe that's a little too aggressive. Maybe every 2 or 3 months I'd build a new deck. That's definitely slowed down in the last couple of years. I would say during the pandemic, I've maybe only built 2 or 3 decks, but still throughout that whole time, there's a couple different ways that I've tackled building a deck. And I think this is going to be true for many people, that the easiest way is just starting with a commander, picking an individual legendary creature or, a planeswalker or whatever we're allowed to do in these current times, and using that as the focal point for building the deck around it, really leaning into that theme.
That makes sense.
And I think
that's probably where a lot of people start, right?
I think that's where a lot of people are going to start. And honestly, I think that is what really, one of the things that really makes this format work is you can have this sort of individual single nucleation point that you build a whole deck around. I think it can be much more overwhelming to say, well, I'm going to build the 60 card deck. I'm interested in this one card, but I am not necessarily going to draw it every game. I can't necessarily count on synergizing with it every game. And I have to find a whole bunch of other cards to sort of fill out a full game plan. With Commander, you say, here's my starting point. Here's what I want to happen. And that single choice is going to guide the choice of every other card that you end up putting in your deck.
Honestly, that's got to be a huge part of the success of the format.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. We're talking about people needing to get this like activation energy to overcome the inertia of like getting into a new format, and having a commander and saying pick a card that works for this commander is a great place to start building a deck, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things that makes cube design really hard, is it is even more than just building a deck.
Absolutely.
There's just like so much stuff that you can choose from. But yes, just making it a lot more straightforward. It also just makes it really fun, because you suddenly aren't just saying, well, here's these cards I'm interested in. Can I go a little bit in this direction or a little bit in that direction? You can go really strongly in a brand new direction. And it kind of gives you a new lens through which you can look at all of the history of Magic. So maybe I'm building my wizard tribal deck and I have Adeliz at the helm. Now all of a sudden I have a really clear direction of saying, well, I want to play as many wizards as I can, and I also want to play as many cheap spells as I can to be able to trigger that. And that just lets me focus on a really specific plan.
If I may start maybe a little more broad, because I appreciate this angle of like, all right, now how do I actually start building a deck? For me, at a very, very high level, I've gone through different sort of phases of my commander life, and I even more than you, like, really dropped out of Commander like 5 years ago. I checked recently on my old deck tracking website, and the most recent Commander deck I had started new was from 5 years ago, and then I made a new deck for the first time like last month. So I have not been actively brewing in this format for a long time. When I was playing back in the day, I would say one of my biggest driving factors was trying to do something novel with my decks. I wanted to do something that nobody else had done, and with access to the internet, you can find a lot of things that a lot of people have done. And, I guess maybe I'm just, the one true Holden Caulfield. I want to think I'm a special snowflake. But to me, it's so much about the deck building in EDH is so much about expression. And I wanted to do something new for the first time. So, some of my favorite decks from back in the day, I think I mentioned my 5-color Norn the Wary deck on the show a couple weeks ago. This is a deck where you were trying to get Norn the Wary into play through lots of creature tutors, and then you had access to all 5 colors to take advantage of weird fringe cards that were good with Norn the Wary. So that was a deck I was really proud of. I also built this 5-color cycling deck that I really liked. That was basically like, I love Astral Slide. Can I build like an Astral Slide cycling deck where I'm just playing Life from the Loam and getting back cycling lands, and that's what the whole deck is about, and then it somehow wins. That was the deck I really enjoyed playing. And in both those cases, I did not start with a commander, right? I was not thinking like, I want to build this commander and like go to EDH Rec and see what cards are good with this commander. It was like, here's a very high-level creative idea I want to see if I can capture with the deck.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that as opposed to starting with a specific commander, just starting with a theme or like a goal, or just this is kind of the secondary thing that I want to make happen, whether it's winning through Mortal Kombat or winning with land destruction or some weird thing that maybe doesn't appear so much in games. One of my favorite ones, I've actually built this deck twice, was I love Guildleaf Archdruid that lets you tap 7 druids to steal all of the player's land. Correct, yeah.
Or worse, make your opponent say, okay, now kill me.
Yeah.
And then you go,
it's very frustrating. I thought that card was so cool. And then it's also just fun. I love building tribal decks to discover that there is a wealth of cards in a lot of tribes that just makes you think about them in a different way. Turns out all the druids are just these like dorky mana dorks that tap for mana. So when Rashmi Eternity's Crafter came out, I built a blue-green druids deck. Coiling Oracle, also druid. That's very cool. And that was a lot of fun. I didn't really expect it to work, and it worked flawlessly the first time we played it. And then a couple years later, because I put it away right away, like nobody liked playing against it. But then when they printed Tulane, adding one more color to the druid deck, that was a little too appealing. So yeah, I've built that particular sort of secondary theme, that secondary goal. It's not just I want to build this particular commander and win, but I want to steal everybody's lands and then go into the forest and then put 100 counters on my Helix Pinnacle and be a total pacifist deck was the plan. And yeah, people didn't like it.
Yeah, that kind of gets to how my approach to the format has changed very broadly. So, like I said, back in the day, I was really interested in making like novel decks, right? And I still remember scouring forums and stuff and finding decks that I was just like, I wish I had thought of this. One of my favorite ones was a Zedru the Great-Hearted deck, the Jeskai goat that can donate permanents to your opponents. That was a Zedru Voltron deck that was all about putting auras on Zedru and then just donating the auras to your opponents, because it doesn't matter who controls the auras, it still pumps up Zedru, and so you just have, you get all the benefit of Zedru donating things, but you're not doing any of the dumb like Illusions of Grandeur nonsense where you're trying to give them a bad permanent and then bounce it or something. You're just like, no, this goat's going to kill you. It's huge. Or another one of my favorite ones was, I can't remember the name of the commander, some Equipment Matters green-white commander that was just designed to go get Spy Kit, which is the equipment that gives the equipped creature all creature names in the history of Magic. And that deck then had a bunch of like weird combos and weird cards that got really good that are normally unplayable in Commander, right? A card that says, when this creature dies, search your library for a creature with the same name and put it into play or whatever, which you just can't normally play. But now they get really good because of this weird equipment Spy Kit, which doesn't really have much application outside of that. So I still remember these decks that I was like, these are just beautiful, creative expressions of putting these game pieces together in a way that is like totally unique and just makes you think. And that's what I really aspire to in my deck building. But a lot of these decks, Anthony, I built them, I played them, and it was either no fun for me or no fun for my opponents or both, right? I kept that cycling deck for a long time because I really liked that gimmick, but people don't like to be Astral Slide locked, where every turn you're cycling 6 cards, sliding out all of their permanents, sliding out some of your own creatures that then come into play and get your cycling lands back into your hand. People generally not a fan of that. So
yeah, that one was also difficult because it kind of snuck up on you. You would just sort of be not really doing anything, and then we would have lost for 2 or 3 turns before people really realized it. So I started trying to rally and trying to point out to people like, no, we can't leave Astral Slide here. by the time you realize it's a problem, it's going to be too late. You have to destroy it now.
Yeah, it would just kind of sit there accruing value. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't ever like, that card's going to kill me.
But then as soon as you're like, oh, now I'll attack Andy, it's like, okay, well,
now I have
your board
a
is
vast
gone.
toolbox of just ways to deal with everything. So anyway, a lot of these decks just weren't fun to play. And I think that made some sense when I was, like you said, designing tons of commander decks, right? Because I had a bunch of commander decks. I had like 5 or 6 at any given time. I had ones that were fun to play. And so
it was fun to do it once or twice and be like, okay, cool, I did the thing. I accomplished the goal and then move on.
Yeah, so when I was designing lots of decks, that made sense, right? I was like, okay, let me see if I can make a cool experimental deck, see what it's like, and then probably take it apart if it's a total nightmare. When I eventually took apart almost all of my commander decks and, started putting them into my cube, and it's obviously very easy to see how someone that approaches commander decks that way ended up getting really invested in cube, right? If I was just like looking at commander as this creative expression of combining these puzzle pieces into a weird Rube Goldberg machine, that obviously informs a lot of just kind of what cube is in an abstract way. Now I would say, if I had to describe my overall approach to commander, it's that when you sit down at a pod, you get like a 25% vote in what kind of game you play at that table, right? And in cube design, you have 100% control over what kind of games are played in your cube. Well, I mean, maybe that's not quite exactly right. Players can do things you didn't expect or whatever. But for the most part, the cards you put in your cube are the cards people are going to play. And so you have control over what the gameplay experience is like. In Commander, you don't have control, right, over your 3 opponents. So what you do get is a 25% vote in what kind of game plays out. And I would say that both of my current Commander decks are predicated on this idea of trying to diminish the aspects of Commander I don't like. There are definitely aspects of Commander games that I don't enjoy, and multiplayer Magic that I find to be kind of inherently problematic. And trying to make my deck a vote for let's not do that is how I look at both of my decks at this current moment.
Just be the change you want to see at the table.
Right. So I mean, to get practical, my one Commander deck I've had since I was playing 5-6 years ago. It's my baby. It's a mono red Goblins deck with Grenzo Havoc Razor at the helm. This is a 2-drop Goblin that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may either exile the top card of their library and cast it, or goad a creature they control. This was one of the first creatures printed with goad. Now goad's everywhere because Wizards realized this is a good mechanic. But this deck is all about playing little dinky goblins, making them unblockable, attacking your opponents and saying, hey, all those big creatures, you're just trying to hide behind some big pillow fort of value and like not attack anybody until you each build up your own big value engines, and then there's big game-winning plays that sort of fire off on turn 10. We're not going to do that. You're going to be attacking with your little creatures. You're going to be attacking each other. Life totals are going to be going down. And that's what that whole deck is based around.
It is a really interesting deck. I like the combination of forcing the game forward and also just the sort of like randomness of you stealing cards from your opponents. I know a lot of players really dislike that, but I think it's just cool to see some variation where it's not just we're going to play goblins and attack every turn. Sometimes you come up with something pretty novel by combining tools that you've stolen from your opponents.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, this is like a bad commander in air quotes, right? Like if you're trying to build this deck that is designed to make your opponents attack each other, and you're starting from scratch, you would choose a multicolored commander. We have access to more creatures, more spells in different colors. If you're trying to build a goblin tribal deck, there are any number of goblins that are just better goblin tribal commanders that do more things with goblins. That gets to my next point, which is something that's kind of very intrinsic to me as a deck builder. I am inherently very spiky. I want my decks to function. I want them to be powerful. And I have a hard time consciously being like, let me make it a little worse because I know that will be more fair to the rest of the table. What works for me is giving myself a limitation, saying like, here is my restriction I'm giving myself. And then within that restriction, I am free to optimize to my heart's content and try and make it as good as possible. So in the case of my Grenzo deck, it's like, all right, this deck is going to be about goblin. It's going to be about making your opponents attack each other with creatures. Within that restriction, go. Like, how successful can you make that deck? It's not like I have Kiki Jiki Zealous Conscript combos in there. Or I can't think of any other. I'm so out of the EDH meta. I don't even know what the number one mono red combos are these days. I'm sure they're out there. I don't have those, right? I have some really long-winded multi-piece goblin combos that can come together. But for the most part, I'm just trying to do the thing that I've set out to do and optimize for that rather than optimize for pure win percentage.
I don't know if I totally agree that you've succeeded there, but I get your point.
In what way have I failed?
You have some pretty solid ways to tutor up those combos, even if they involve a lot of cards.
Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but my next thing is I think every EDH deck should have a combo kill.
Let's stick with restrictions for a second,
okay,
because
great.
I totally agree that this is a huge part of the way that I have been approaching the format, probably for as long as we've been playing it, but especially recently because we've been playing for a while. We've been going to the LGS more recently, and just like having a big collection, it's easy to build a fairly powerful deck. And it's also easy to just kind of play with the same cards every time. Just be like, yep, here's these staples. Let's just put them in the deck. So something that I do really value to try and push myself out of just playing the same staples is to give myself a tight restriction. I mean, we talk all the time about how constraints breed creativity. And one of my favorite ways to do that is tribal themes, to be honest, just because it feels like a restriction that in a way doesn't feel limiting because it also is extremely flavorful. So a couple of the decks that I have right now are a black-white Knights deck and a red-blue Wizards deck, where I've just held myself to not including any off-theme creatures whatsoever. And that's
nothing if it doesn't have the type line.
Exactly, yeah. So everything's a wizard, everything's a knight, and it's a bit of a tight restriction. I know you do pretty close to that in your goblins deck as well, except for a couple things cards that are kind of like essential toolbox pieces.
Imperial Recruiter goes and gets a goblin. He's basically a goblin.
He's a friend to goblins, but that just forces you again to try and look for something different. So I think Tribal's the easiest restriction. I also like building monocolored decks because I feel similarly about it. Just lets you push a little bit deeper into what that color has to offer and feels very flavorful to me. To be honest, a lot of the like 5-color decks or even 3 or 4-color decks, they lose a little bit of that flavor and often just feel like, well, this is the pile of the commander staples. So for my own taste, I really enjoy restricting myself by color.
I agree completely. I think monocolored EDH decks are a delight. They have the other big benefit of not forcing you to have a bunch of expensive cards in your mana base for the mana base to be functional. I really love my mana base of just like 28 mountains and a couple of utility lands. It's a joy.
I mean, you say that, but oh man, the look on our commander correspondent Daniel's face when he borrowed one of my monocolored EDH decks and it has about as many fetch lands as it can play was very bleak.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes you still have to have fetch lands. There's
I still want all my fetch lands so I can, do all my top of library manipulation
of course,
stuff. But yeah, he wasn't happy about that.
To that point of building within a restriction, I always think of my commander decks firstly as what is the goal? What kind of game do I want to play? And then secondly, how does this deck like answer the questions posed by the table? And so to me, I like my decks to have answers for almost any kind of thing that can happen. That doesn't mean that it's always removal, right? Which I think is the most common answer to these kinds of things. For example, my goblin deck, I have, I think, 2 ways to do anything about a creature. Well, 3 technically. Okay, there's a couple more. I'm starting to think there's a couple more little things. For the most part, there's very little creature removal in that deck, and all of it is goblin-based, right? And so I'm saying, here's my restriction. This deck is about goblins, so if I want to deal with creatures, I have to do it in a goblin-focused way. But more importantly, the way this deck answers the question of what do you do about creatures is it says, let your opponent keep them and make them attack each other, right? That is the answer to creatures from that deck.
I think that's very cool because like we were talking about with having a template, it wouldn't make sense for you to say, I need a bunch of creature removal because your opponent's creatures are part of your game plan.
Right.
You have an Avacyn Angel of Hope. Well, your plan is to try and make that attack someone else. Unfortunately, it has Vigilance. That doesn't always work out too well, which is why I love playing mono white against your mono red deck. But in a lot of other cases,
Sometimes I get there. Sometimes I get there.
Sometimes you have a Raging River, and I only have a single copy of Avacyn.
Yeah, or just Bedlam. Yeah, so similarly in that deck, would the best thing for win percentage be to play Vandal Blast? Maybe, but instead I like having a bunch of goblins that can answer artifacts that are goblins. And the plus side this has for me that kind of gets to my other deck building preferences, I think you kind of eschew tutors. You don't really love tutoring in Commander for the reason that you like playing different cards every time, right? Is that true? Yeah,
there are definitely some exceptions, but my general preference is, I think that, yeah, Commander would be a lot more fun if there were fewer tutors because, I mean, the whole point of having a huge deck that's singleton is you want to see different cards and have a different game every time, which, I'm not going to say anybody's doing anything wrong if they're playing a lot of tutors, but for me, I want to lean into that flavor for the most part.
I do like to play tutors, but not to get like the one thing that my deck does every single time. I love a toolbox. A toolbox just really sparks joy for me. So, there's a lot of goblin tutors in my goblin deck, Goblin Recruiter and Imperial Recruiter and Goblin Matron, all these cards that go and get goblins from your deck, either put them in your hand or whatever on top of your library. And because I have leaned into goblin answers for all the questions that the table might ask that deck, that means that all of those tutors now become ways to also answer that thing, right? If the problem's an artifact, I go get Goblin Trashmaster. If the problem is I can't get through in combat, I go get Subterranean Scout. There's all kinds of different little pieces that will get me answers to whatever I need at that time. I guess one of the things I really like is trying to really solve the puzzle of being asked a hard question, right? And the mono red goblin's pretty limited in what they can do in the grand scheme of Magic. But being able to try and figure out, all right, how am I actually going to answer this Elesh Norn in my mono red goblins deck, right? Which I did do exactly once. That's a really interesting question to try and figure out. Yeah, I did get there one time.
Yeah, I feel like the flip side of tutors is, so in my mono black Yawgmoth deck, I do have at least Demonic Tutor, maybe 1 or 2 others. And I like that idea of having like flexibility in toolbox, but so often it just gets the same kind of cards, which, I recognize as maybe a flaw in my building a deck to meet the kinds of play experience I'm looking for.
Yeah, I was going to say, my deck was definitely 100% a toolbox deck. No one could argue otherwise for the longest time.
And then Conspicuous
Then
Snoop
they
was
printed
printed.
Conspicuous Snoop, and now I think maybe 65% of the time it's correct to go and try and start
more.
that Snoop chain, which does bring me to my point of I really love having some infinite, the game ends now combo in all of my decks, even if it's really convoluted and involves many pieces. Because, Commander is a format where oftentimes you will have a huge amount of resources available to you because your deck popped off, you were able to draw 40 cards, and you have 60 mana. And I think one of the worst things in that situation is not being able to actually close out the game. Like, all right, you just gained an enormous advantage, and now either everyone's just going to scoop to your giant advantage, even though you haven't shown them how you're going to win, or you're going to, make us muddle through 12 more turns while you try and figure out how to actually kill everybody after you've gained a huge advantage. So I really like having this situation of just saying, yeah, if my deck pops off, I can do this. I can put these 4 cards in play, and the game will be over. One of the things I dislike about Commander games is that they oftentimes tend to drag on for a long time. And so anything I can expedite that is going to, again, be a vote for the kind of game I want to have.
Yeah, I mean, it is also nice, especially if you're not playing with a high density of tutors and you have some infinite combos that take a little bit of luck and work to get going, is it does still just add to that long tail of varied experiences that every once in a while, oh, my deck's going to do this cool thing. It's not super fun to play against a deck that on turn 3 always does the same combo, but when it's 1 in 20 games, this will come together. That can be kind of fun.
Yeah, I think a good example of this is I played a couple games on stream with the Guardian Project podcast, and in the second game we played, I'll find the link and put it in the show notes. I did end up winning that game, spoiler alert. One of those games in my deck just popped off. It involved a Dockside Extortionist and making a bunch of mana, and eventually I got to the point where I was able to kind of make infinite mana and then go find cards I needed to find. And the first couple combos I tried got answered. They were like, all right, well, actually I'm going to exile that thing. It's going to, end the game or whatever. And I had to get really creative with how I actually ended the game. And that's the kind of late game win conditions I really love, right? Where it's not like I have one combo and if it gets disrupted, then boohoo, I'm done. It's that I've got these broad swath of combos where maybe it's Conspicuous Snoop, Kiki Jiki, make infinite Conspicuous Soups, Sack to Mog Fanatic. Maybe it's a Dockside Extortionist plus Cloudstone Curio plus Mogwar Marshal plus Skirk Prospector plus either of Pashalik Mons or Goblin Sharpshooter, right? That's a really convoluted way to win the game, but it works. It's an infinite combo. That's what I like to kind of weave through all my decks and, try and win games in different ways if I possibly can. Though it is worth noting with Snoop being printed, this Goblin deck now does have a fairly linear way, can at least threaten to win the game if unanswered.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. Another way that I think I sort of combine two of these things is making the restriction that kind of unique win condition or that unique goal. It's just my deck is all about trying to accomplish a certain thing. And that again can be another way to just force myself to build a deck in a certain way. So I don't know how well this has worked out, but in my mono white Avacyn deck, I really just love this silly card Pure Reflection that the card doesn't really make any sense, but with Avacyn, it makes you make some tokens.
I have never seen that
it's never gone. It's never mattered,
which is fine. That's what's great about Commander. You're allowed to build a deck where it's all about this thing that doesn't actually matter, and they actually just die to a giant angel or whatever.
Right, but it's another way just to sort of push the gameplay in a different direction. That even if what my deck is actually doing is attacking with a giant angel, I'm still over here trying to make this ridiculous combo work, and that also kind of adds some longevity to a deck because I haven't really accomplished that goal yet. So there's more games still to play.
I'm waiting for the game to be totally dominated by Pure Reflections.
Yeah. I think what actually needs to happen is I need to take apart my mono white and my mono black deck and play a black white enchantment deck to make that work.
Should we get to some of the more practical things that guide us when we're actually making card choices for these decks? We've talked a lot about the high level goals, right? What is our broad approach? How do we set a goal for ourselves? What are our limitations we're working within? I think we should get to more practical stuff.
Sure. So, do you always try and choose cheap cards when you can?
Hey, that's the first thing on my list, baby.
I'm not surprised.
Well, this is funny. I feel like this is actually a thing where, again, I'm not up to date on the current EDH content meta.
No, we're not giving EDH deck building advice. We're giving EDH deck building perspective.
Sure. But my impression is that after many years, Commander players have finally realized that cheap spells are actually better. Where for a long time, Commander was like, the whole point of this format is you can cast 7, 8, 9 mana spells or whatever. To me, I think this is best exemplified by how long people kept telling me Cultivate and Kodama's Reach were incredible staples of green and Commander. And I was like, this card's too expensive. Rampant Growth is just better. It's a better card. Are you actually running out of cards in your Commander deck such that you needed that Kodama's Reach or Cultivate to give you another card? No, you wanted to accelerate sooner. So I think my impression is that Commander players have come around to this in general, but I'm always on cheaper cards for two reasons. One, it is almost always more powerful to play the cheaper effect even if it's a little bit less individually effective, the ability to just cast multiple spells a turn, to do things a turn earlier, always taking the cheap options whenever I can. But more importantly, I just like making many decisions, right? If you're going to have a turn where you're going to have 8 mana and 7 cards in your hand, I want to be able to cast 4 of them and decide what order I'm doing it in, rather than cast 1 of them and say, I hope I don't get countered.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of complexity that goes into that sort of change in the way that the game has the way that people build decks. Part of it, I think, is just that they printed a lot more cards and the game has actually changed. And I think another part is that the meta has changed. Like, if somebody is playing a faster deck, if someone's less interested in doing the big splashy stuff, then you kind of have to keep up, right? You have to go toe-to-toe, or you're going to get squashed out of the game. But I see the other side of that as well, where if you still just want to cast big splashy stuff, you can definitely like cultivate your play group to allow that to happen. So,
or you could Kodama's reach your play group,
or you could absolutely do that. I tend to agree with you in that it's just more fun for me to be able to double spell and play lots of cheap things, take lots of actions. But I do also still love big spells. In my wizard deck here, I was very cautious and allowed myself 2 big wizards, and I really enjoy playing with Melek and Niv-Mizzet Perrin because they're just like big splashy wizards, but they do get stuck in my hand a lot. So even with this deck that has overall a pretty low curve, I struggle a little bit to sometimes get those to work.
Yeah, I don't see the other side. I have no affection in my heart for big spells. I have no desire to do it. I mean, there are some individual cards.
What a sad, broken.
There's some individual cards that I like, right? But usually they're cards that work with a bunch of cheap cards.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love Bulbous Citadel. I think Thousand Year Storm is really cool. I agree that Niv-Mizzet Perrin is really cool. But these are all cards that only work in a context where you're casting lots of little spells in the first place.
What's the biggest Genesis wave you've ever cast?
I don't think I've ever cast a Genesis wave.
Wow.
You know why? Because I don't like trigger accounting with my friends. That to me is such a great example. You cast a giant Genesis wave and it's like, do you win? And you're like, I don't know.
Give me a second.
Let's figure it out. Let's put 45 triggered abilities on the stack and see if I win.
I don't know. If I do that, I always do it with a grin. It's funny. So one of my decks is green-white. It's kind of just a ramp deck. And you're like, why is Genesis Wave in here? This card is just bad. Don't play it. And
I
I'm like,
said that, to be fair.
You absolutely said that.
Well, maybe I did.
And I'm like, no, you're confused. The reason to play this deck is to cast Genesis Wave. You're missing the point.
You know, that's the beauty of Commander, right? Everybody can have their own thing that brings them joy. I'll be over here trying to tax your Genesis Wave by 1, 2, or 3, or maybe keep you from casting at all with Gaddock Teague.
Yeah, you've done that to me. I'll also advocate, actually, just because we're talking about Genesis Wave, for the moderate Genesis Wave. Sometimes casting it for like 7 is still pretty good. It pulls you far enough ahead to win the game.
And only in Commander is having 10 mana to cast on a spell a moderate effect.
A moderate Genesis Wave.
So yeah, that's my first thing. I'm always trying to lower my mana curve. So I will always look to cut cards from my list that are 3, 4 mana and up. And in both my current Commander decks, in one I have 2 spells over 3 mana in the entire deck. And the other I have a few more. The Goblin deck has a few more, but the Goblin deck also has Goblin Lackey and Warren Instigator, ways to put goblins into play without paying their mana costs. So I'm not often casting Muxus for the full 6, right? I'm oftentimes just plopping them out there and seeing what happens. Muxus also way to cheat goblins into play.
It's kind of like a little Goblin Genesis Wave, would you say?
Fine, sure. I accept your presentation. So anyway, lower mana curve whenever possible. I think some people might think, oh, well, Commander is such a big format. I have to deal 120 damage to my opponents in theory if I'm going to win the game. I can't do that with a bunch of little cards, but you just can. Which brings me around to my next goal, which is related, which is that I love building decks that consist of small synergistic pieces that are worth more than the sum of their parts, right? Like, you have a little machine you're building that makes every single one of your cards a little better and just a lot of synergy built into it, as opposed to just slinging good cards around.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that also contributes just to the experience of games playing out differently. When your cards don't just fit together in one way, but they have a lot of little overlapping synergies, it just means you're going to play a lot of games that feel very different. So I'm definitely always looking for that as well.
Yeah, I guess the last thing on the cheap spells point is that the people that say every deck needs 10 ramp spells, right? Or whatever, that kind of template idea. I think the actual point they're trying to get across is every deck needs something to do in the first couple turns of the game, right? You can't just sit there and do nothing until turn 3 or 4. I mean, you can if you want. It's Commander. You can do whatever you want. But I would not recommend for your deck's win percentage or your fun playing that you sit there and do nothing until you start casting 4 and 5 mana spells. And for most Commander decks, the easiest thing to slot in there is just, okay, well then play ramp in the first couple turns of the game, right? Like, get to the later turns sooner because these early turns are not worth anything to us. And both of my decks that I currently have are not about that at all. The early turns of the game are play little tiny creatures that are little dinky guys, and then I'm eventually going to kill you with just little guys. That's all I do. Little guys.
Little guys.
I always sit down at the table and people are like, what's that deck all about? I'm like, it's about little 1/1 goblins. I'm going to kill you with 1/1 goblins. So get ready. What does your current stable look like, Anthony?
So I have 5 decks currently. One of my favorites is a blue-red wizards deck, captained by Adeliz. Just got lots of cheap wizards. I mean, this is a great example of what we're just talking about, where it's just like, I'm just playing Curse Catcher and all kinds of other random little creatures that just say wizard, especially things that have evasion. Wingcrafter is a great card in this particular deck because it just makes 2 of my wizards fly. And then lots of cheap spells, cheap cantrips, and then a couple splashier things that let me refill my hand and maybe kind of storm off, like Finale of Promise that actually lets you cast a bunch of spells for just 1 card, which triggers Adeliz a bunch of times. It's fun because sometimes it's sort of, you get to just play a bunch of creatures and attack people very quickly with the surprise damage, but sometimes you also have to play a little bit slower and figure out how you're going to get to that point in the game where you can kind of storm off, or maybe just chip in with a little evasive wizards here and there.
That's my favorite deck of yours too, both to pilot. I've borrowed most of your decks at some point for a game or two. I love piloting that one, and it's also one of the most fun to play against, I think. I think it's one of the least glass cannon-y.
Yes, I would agree. It has more options to interact with the board and come back from problems. I have a mono-white Avacyn deck, which honestly is a little bit of a pile. This is Avacyn Angel of Hope that just makes all your permanents indestructible.
This is the Pure Reflections deck.
Right, so hopefully you get Pure Reflections and an Oketris Monument and a White Mane Lion, my favorite cards, and get to just kind of go off. But more often it's just like, okay, I'm going to put Helm of the Host on my commander.
Just so we're clear, going off there is you pay 1 mana to get a cat token, a 2/2, and a 2/2 reflection token, right?
No, a 1/1 soldier and a 2/2 reflection token. It is not a cat.
Oh, I thought the monument made a cat token. That's my bad, because the god is a cat.
That would make sense. So yeah, that's never happened yet. We're looking out for that. More often, it just plays an Armageddon or a bunch of Wraths. It's, people enjoy this.
It does the Avacyn thing, which I think is how most people will probably build that deck. Is my stuff's indestructible. Now I'm going to play Hour of Devastation, and oops,
you love to see it.
Oops. I don't love to see it personally.
Great.
And my creatures only decks.
I also have a mono black Yawgmoth, which I think this is another sort of commander that maybe you'll get some side eye if you sit down with. But I just for some reason love this card. I feel like
it's a cool card.
I am often very I'm not high on cards that have a lot of effects that are pretty wordy. Like modern card design has gotten a little bit bloated, but for some reason I feel like the flavor of this card, just all the effects kind of flow together really nicely and give you a lot of opportunities in the game. You're either proliferating or you're doing this sort of sacrifice thing. It gives you a lot of control to draw a bunch of cards and interact with your opponent's creatures by putting counters on them. So I really enjoy this deck, but it is also a little bit oppressive against people that are playing creature-focused strategies.
I found that deck is very draw-dependent. Sometimes
also.
It's like, oops, we're dead on turn 3? How did this happen?
Well,
or locked out of the game on turn 3 more likely than actually dead. And sometimes it's like, what are you doing over there? You're just like waiting till turn 5 and playing a random Liliana Planeswalker I've never seen. Like, what is that deck doing?
Yeah, I mean, that is part of the problem with not playing a lot of tutors. I do have some tutors in that deck, but yeah, it's not great. It's not very consistent. I would say you prioritize consistency in deck building a lot more than I do.
I do love consistency, yeah.
So my newest deck that I have is an Ariel Knight of Windgrace Knights Tribal deck. This is black-white. It's just all the Knights.
That's that like mid-range 4-drop that was a nightmare in Dominaria Limited, but otherwise is kind of unremarkable.
Yeah, it's even unremarkable in this particular deck. It's not a very good card.
It doesn't scale up like well to Commander, right?
I do really like it. What I sort of tried to do is play obviously a bunch of Knights, and it has this activated ability, 3 mana to make a Knight, which not super powerful, but I included a bunch of like instant speed stuff. So the goal is get my commander in play, and then I can protect myself and make Knights if nobody's interfering with me. It plays okay. I've had some good games with it recently.
This seems like this was a deck you made intentionally to be like a little lower power level for when people were groaning too much about Yawgmoth and Selvala, which maybe you'll get to at the end here.
And yeah, the last deck I have is Selvala, Explorer Returned. Actually, this one might be a little bit newer. I forget which order I built these in. This was also just sort of me exploring, grabbed some of my favorite Selesnya cards, but then I got really into this lands theme, so I ended up really leaning into it. So it's sort of just a ramp deck that is going to play a huge Genesis wave and then get a couple big threats into play. But there's a lot of little niche land interactions where you're untapping a Gaia's Cradle that you've turned into a forest with Yavimaya that you can untap with your Arbor Elf and all kinds of little things like that. Casting Tithe when you've sacrificed a bunch of fetch lands on the stack so you have fewer lands than your opponents. Just lots of really geeky land rule stuff. So I kind of like this one, but it is definitely the most glass cannon-y in that it doesn't really have a lot of ways to come back from a board wipe, and my opponents always have it.
Yeah, you oftentimes just that deck does have, I mean, you have a big collection. You love Selesnya. You probably have almost all of the good Selesnya commander staples, all the best cards, and so sometimes that deck is like, I dump my whole hand on turn 3, and now I'm really hoping to draw Genesis Wave because I have no other cards in my hand and 1 million mana already. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah,
And
that's
to be fair,
maybe
Selvala does let you draw more cards, so you get more chances to draw Genesis Wave.
It's true. And I do just really, really love Selvala. It's a very fun card to play with.
It's very cool.
How about you? What do you mentioned you have 2 decks right now?
Yeah, we talked at length about the Goblin deck. I don't think I have to go through that anymore. My other deck is the one I recently built, and this was honestly, I kind of wanted to have another Commander deck. We've been playing more recently. Like, usually, I think my joke for many years is that I played one Commander game a month, and that was enough for me, right? I would, like, in between rounds or whatever, if a draft wasn't firing on time, I'd play one Commander game.
Commander's a weird choice for in-between rounds of...
Right. I'd play one Commander game, and I'd be like, nah, full, that's it. I'm good for a while. And so having one deck was great for that. I didn't need to have multiple decks because I was only playing every once in a while. But lately, again, our play group has gotten a little more into it. We've got a friend that's playing a lot that we're trying to play with more. And so I was like, I don't want to play every single game with the Goblin deck. I just want a second deck. I ended up building around this card, which I just really love and couldn't find another place to play, which is Tauren, Fist of the Angels. This is the 3-mana 2/2 guy with training that when you cast a creature spell, it makes a 1/1 creature with training. Basically, like, I'm going to build green-white creatures and just see what I can do with a creature toolbox style deck where I've got lots of ways to get whatever creatures I need and lots of creatures that have answers to what my opponent is doing. Like, can I stop all my opponent's big, bad strategies with just, like, little 2/2s, right? Like a typical hate bears deck, kind of.
Typical little guys deck.
Just little guys. Just little guys coming to get you.
Turns out, it seems to be incredibly powerful.
It was really bad for a week there when I before I had actually traded or bought any cards for it. I was just like, here's the cards in my collection I'll put together into a deck. And it was missing quite a bit. And then I was like, maybe I'll spend a little bit of money down at the LGS and get a couple of the missing singles for it. And that made a big difference. So I think it's fairly potent right now. It's definitely cracked when I draw Earthcraft. Earthcraft is... And that's an example of, like, that deck becomes a glass cannon deck as soon as I draw Earthcraft. Because Earthcraft basically says, you have infinite mana now. So do you have a way to draw a bunch of cards or play cards off the top of your deck? Great. Then you're going to win. Or do you not, in which case you've made everyone mad at the table because you just took a turn where you took 9 actions and made a million creatures. But now you're just hellbent and hoping again, kind of in the Genesis Wave situation. Like, I hope I draw something good to do with all of his mana. One of the things I was conscious of with this deck, which has been a long time goal of mine in EDH, I don't think I've ever really successfully accomplished, is I've always wanted to build a deck, I think a lot of people have this goal, that scales with the playgroup more than the average deck. And I think a lot of the Hate Bears stuff kind of does that, right?
True,
like,
yeah.
Thalia against a CEDH deck is like a huge problem. It's like, I was going to cast 4 spells this turn, and now they're all taxed by 1 that's super annoying. Thalia against a more casual player, that's like, I'm going to play 1 big spell, I got to pay 1 more mana for it, right? It's not like the end of the world for them. And so that's kind of my idea here, is that hopefully it will scale reasonably well to different kinds of tables, but maybe part of that scaling is just popping out that Earthcraft and popping out that Gaia's Cradle and just sliding in a couple forests and maybe playing it like that.
That's a difficult proposition, though, because, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we love Cube and Commander, is the thing that you just said. You just loved that card, and you wanted to play with it. You wanted to build around it, and these are 2 unique formats that really allow you to do that. But Gaia's Cradle and Earthcraft are also 2 cards you love and want to play.
They're
so how do you sort of balance that?
I'm just playing them, and and sometimes you at least I had a game. I've only played like maybe 5 games with this deck, and one of them was at the LGS when there was too many people for the Cube draft, so I bowed out because I had a new Commander deck I was happy to play around with, and I had Earthcraft in my opening hand, and I just had like the nut draw, and by turn 3 it was like, I'm going to put 9+1/+1 counters on my 20 creatures and then swing out. And everyone was like, okay, well, we're done here. They were I sensed a little bit of salt from one of the players, but also in my defense, the game was over in like 16 minutes. Like, it wasn't like it dragged on forever. At least it was over, you know?
It may be painful, but at least it's brief. Is there a Commander deck that you've taken apart that you really miss?
Oh, boy. Honestly, the deck I miss the most, I only took apart because a key piece got banned. And that is my mono black deck, which was built around Paradox Engine. It was a mono black Toshiro Umezawa deck that was built around Paradox Engine and then later on Bolas' Citadel. And Paradox Engine getting banned really hurt what that deck was trying to do. And like, I understand the reasons Paradox Engine got banned, but like, that's another great example of like why I love Cube so much. It was a genuine bummer, right? I'm definitely more of a magpie than you. I really like collecting the exact perfect versions of every card. And in that deck, for example, I had sought out these rare and somewhat expensive swamps that I really wanted for that deck that I thought matched Toshiro's art and vibe. And they banned Paradox Engine, and I was like, what am I going to do with these 24 APAC swamps now? Like,
great question.
They're just sitting in a box someday. Hopefully I find something else to do with them. I could build another Toshiro deck, I guess, but that's the one I miss the most because it got taken from me, right? I wouldn't miss it as much if I just decided to take it apart, but it was like, oh, this was like my most competitive deck. It was really fun to play at competitive tables, and now it's just I can't play it anymore because it got a lot worse when Paradox Engine got banned. So that's the one I missed the most, probably.
Yeah, it's rough.
What about you?
I think I also miss another mono black deck as well. I had a Gonti Lord of Luxury deck for a while, and it was
That was fun.
It was definitely leaning into playing Gonti and blinking it as much as possible, which was a little bit hard. I think there've been a
Not
lot
that
of
many
things
ways to
printed
blink in black.
since,
At least there wasn't at the time.
But it was
that's
still
part of the
really
fun. Part of the fun was like, how can I blink this creature in mono black, right?
Yeah.
And you're out there like, playing your erratic portal and like putting it back in your hand and recasting it, like that kind of stuff.
Your Conjurer's Closet. And then it also just had this secondary theme of just being as luxurious as possible. So playing all kinds of artifacts that just had beautiful objects on them. And then I'd just be out there spinning clocks of omens and all kinds of weird little artifacts, building a little luxurious machine while I'm playing all of my opponent's cards.
It's funny. I tend to get a little tilted at Gonti in limited context.
Okay.
Specifically in the regular cube is where it gets me the most. I think it's been cut from
It's
there.
been cut pretty long since, yeah, but I really enjoyed it there as well.
It was definitely pretty tilting to me there. I don't remember ever getting tilted by that Gonti EDH deck because it was just, I thought it was fun. And I can let go of a lot of my like more competitive nature in a multiplayer game because it's like, well, we're all just here to have fun, right? Like if I'm actually just trying to optimize for winning, this whole contract kind of falls apart. So if Anthony is going off and playing all these cards from different decks to combine like and make a new engine for himself, God bless you.
Not everyone shared that willingness,
Some
though.
people
A lot
really
of people
don't like having
really,
their
really
cards
disliked
taken.
it. And that was, I think, part of the reason why I just had to move on.
All right, well, that's Anthony and my approaches to building commander decks and how we think about the format. For those of you that are dedicated, diehard Cube people and you don't care about Commander at all, sorry, but we've said multiple times, this podcast is not a Cube podcast. It is a Magic podcast about design, having fun with the game.
Telescopes.
Yeah. I put...
Cooking.
All right.
And it's finally happened. We've turned into a podcast that just lists Magic cards.
That's what happens when we talk about Commander. That's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio, but stay tuned for our interview with John Terrell from Cultic Cube about CubeCon at the conclusion of this episode. And also, Anthony, we didn't have time. We didn't touch on our riddle, our logic puzzle, so we're going to have to leave that for next week to come back and actually do a follow-up on the logic puzzle. If you want to participate in the logic puzzle, go check out the intro to last week's episode. And I got to say, multiple people in the Discord, unless they are lying, did solve it on their own, which thoroughly impresses me because I never would have, I don't think.
I want to say I'm impressed, but this all might still be a huge troll, and they're all just, I'm looking at all these blacked out posts just saying, wow, Anthony's really falling hard for this, and this is not a real puzzle. Great job, Andy.
And that would be such a great way to gaslight you. I wish I was that smart and evil.
We also might need to do a little telescope corner next week and get a little correction on my understanding of the expansion of the universe.
I tried to get my neighbor who works for NASA, and not specifically on the James Webb Space Telescope, but she has worked on similar projects and is, largely in charge of like outreach and stuff. She actually reached out to me and was like, send me that episode. I want to hear what normal people talk about the telescope about. And she was like, Anthony's not a normal person. She was like, but you are. She didn't want to come on the show, though. She doesn't like her voice, which is true. But no one likes their voice. But anyway, we might do a little telescope follow-up.
I mean, the photos were great. Can we just say really briefly, it's amazing. This telescope is everything I wanted it to be.
The photos are even better than I expected by a significant margin. I think the first photo, I was like, yeah, this is cool, but this is just like, okay, cool, deep space, right? Like my breath was not taken away by like the photo that the White House released. And then they released the 4 other photos, and I was like, okay, okie dokie, these are great. In awe.
Yeah, and the one spectrogram that's like, here's a planet 1,000 light years away that definitively has water in its atmosphere.
Got steam, baby.
And this was the first 5 days of this telescope's operation, and there it is. So, looking forward to what we see next.
That's it for the show this week. Stay tuned for the CubeCon talk. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by Anthony and I, sitting across the table from each other, each shuffling our respective commander decks, and just listing off cards.
My deck is so shuffled right now.
So shuffled.
I'm so ready.
Hi, everybody. We're here with John Terrell from Cultic Cube. John, also one of the organizers of CubeCon, the event Anthony and I can't stop talking about and are excited to attend. I believe it's 13 weeks away at this point. John, welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks so much for having me, you guys.
CubeCon is finally coming to pass after 3 years of organizing. The first one thwarted by the coronavirus. Now it's finally happening.
Yeah, that's right. My goodness, we started planning this back in 2019. And the aim was to have the event in May of 2020. But as you intimate, that did not happen, and it was very sad. So yeah, I'm happy we got the band back together. We got this thing rolling, and it's happening now, darn it.
Well, see, I actually am a little bit glad it got postponed because it was previously scheduled for my wife's birthday weekend. And I was going to have a really hard conversation with her about how, like, look, you have lots of birthdays. CubeCon's never happened before. But then I decided I would just do a worldwide pandemic instead, which is why I, of course, ate the bat, did the whole coronavirus thing so it would get canceled.
Yeah, we've got a mutual friend who is... I won't name any names, though, because I don't want to get him into trouble, but he's getting married on the same weekend as CubeCon, or just maybe the weekend before or something.
Unthinkable.
And he's going on his honeymoon, so he's in the process of trying to convince his fiancée that Madison would be a lovely spot for a honeymoon.
Oh, dear. I'm not sure I would even do that. You do only get the one honeymoon, you know.
That's true.
She has a bunch of birthdays.
Is that true? I feel like you could just go on another trip.
You can do that. You can also get divorced and get married again, so you can have as many honeymoons as you want.
Yeah, second
Anyway, we're getting
honeymoon.
off topic, John. As of this episode's release, CubeCon tickets are on sale, so I'm sure by the time this episode's hitting your ears, I've already got my ticket. And I should tell you, John, I rented a 12-passenger van, and a big group of us are road tripping it from the East Coast, so we're very excited about
Oh, my goodness.
That's our dedication to CubeCon.
Oh, heck yeah. How long is the drive?
It's going to be like 14 hours, which we're going to do just kind of one shot in a day, you know, swapping drivers around.
Okay.
But it's going to work better for us. I'm excited to just get like a wax marker and write on the windows like CubeCon or bust, as if we were like, you know, just graduated or something from high school. It's going to be good.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
So we have a bunch of questions from listeners about CubeCon. I think a lot of our listeners are probably interested in attending. And the biggest question, which I also share, is just, what is a day at CubeCon going to look like?
Well, I am glad you asked. CubeCon, it's happening October 20th through 23rd, 2022 at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison, Wisconsin. We're going to be doing a lot of cubing is the main thing, of course. We are partnered with GameholeCon, which is a big, mainly tabletop gaming convention. They're renting out the whole Alliant Energy Center, this convention center, and we're going to have a portion of it, a big portion of it. And on any given day, there's going to be a bunch of stuff happening from our perspective. We're going to have a main event where we've solicited, as you all have talked about on your show, cubes from the community, and the community has voted on the cubes that they want to see at CubeCon. All of those cubes are going to be available in the main event. On Friday and Saturday are two sort of longest days of the convention. We're going to have 3 draft sessions firing. So people will be able to sign up for any of those, any of those drafts. We'll also have drafts firing in the main event on Thursday and at the end on Sunday as well. But there'll be fewer on those days. And also on Sunday, we'll have our final top 8 where we'll have our point leaders who will be drafting a powered cube. So you can come to CubeCon, you can sign up for main event cubes, draft in those, get points, maybe make top 8, maybe not, still have a lot of fun, I hope, and get lots of cool swag and things. Also, we'll have a big free play area where people will be bringing cubes or whatever they'd like. I mean, maybe EDH decks and so on, battle boxes to hang out and do those kind of things. Also, we're going to have coverage, so things will be streamed, and we'll have interviews and deck techs and things. I'm looking forward to that. And then also a thing that I'm super excited about, more excited than maybe others are, is we're going to have some roundtable discussion sessions each day, because I'm really excited about CubeCon as a sort of academic conference of Cube.
Yeah, you got a big round table energy, which I say in the best way possible. I say that as purely a compliment.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, we'll have to get you all participating in some of those because, I mean, you two
you can't keep me from a round table.
No, you all are definitionally big round table energy, I feel.
That sounds great. So on each of those draft sessions, those draft windows, is every cube that the community voted on going to be available at that time? So there's going to be, 25 or whatever drafts firing simultaneously?
Here's the plan, and this is an exciting thing that some of my colleagues are working on. So among my colleagues. There's Jonathan Brostoff and
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. No, he's great. He's sort of the driving force behind this thing, who got everybody together in the first instance. Two people I want to shout out in this particular regard are Gwen Decker, who is the mastermind behind Cube Cobra, and Zach Halpern, who's the mastermind behind MTG JSON. I'm not a tech person, you guys, but this is a service that things like Scryfall rely on, like a database of Magic cards. These guys are developing a web app that's going to allow people to select the cubes that they want to draft. So probably we'll have people sort of rank the cubes in the order that they most want to draft them, and maybe have cubes that they can excise that they say they never want to draft. And then through the magic of the robots, pairings will be set up, or not pairings, but we'll get the pods.
People
set
will be
up
put into pods.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool.
So there could be up to every single cube being played at one draft session if there's enough players, but otherwise it'll sort of fall back on whichever ones get the most highest ranked votes, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And so we're still working out the details of this, but we want both for everybody to be able to draft cubes that they want to draft. That's what they're there to do. But we would also like to give people some diversity of cubes that they're drafting, at least if that's what they want. And we also want the people who are kindly volunteering their cubes to have an opportunity to have their cubes played. So, yeah, Gwen and Zach, they're working with the robots on figuring out, balancing all those things. But I hope that we're able to achieve all of those goals.
You should pass along to Gwen and Zach if you haven't already. I don't think one player should be allowed to play the same cube twice for points. I don't want somebody out here grinding some cube they know to make it to top 8.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to be forced to play different cubes. This is like, you got to prove your mettle on a variety of different environments. Right.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We've talked a little bit about some of this stuff, and I think we're probably going to do something like, if you have drafted a cube once already, then the likelihood that you're going to be placed into that cube again is going to decrease.
You get -4 draft this cube again points for the robots to digest.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. That sounds great.
Yeah, I think so. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be super fun.
I guess it's a small detail, John. Do you know when the Alliance Center opens in the morning and when it closes at night?
I think I'm right about this. I believe it opens at 7 a.m. and closes at midnight.
Okay, nice big window
so
there.
we can play a lot of cubes.
That's a lot of cube to get played in that little window, I think.
So we're planning on firing the first main event draft of any given day at, I believe, 9 a.m. is when we'll get started. And we're hoping to have things wrapped up at 10 p.m. or so. And then that gives us a little leeway if things are running late, because, as I say, I think it closes at midnight. So we could have a little more time. But, hopefully, It'll be long days of cubing.
I don't envy the logistics of this endeavor, given how hard it is to just get 8 people that I know personally into one building for a cube draft on time.
Yeah.
So this is definitely a big thing you're tackling, and thank you for doing it.
Well, we've got numbers on our side here, which is super nice, because I feel you about trying to get 8 people together. Something always comes up. And, that's
I'm just waiting for, the 8th person in 4 different cubes to oversleep, and now you have like 4 or 7 pods firing at 9 a.m. It's going to be a whole thing.
Right. But now we're going to have however many attendees we have, which, hopefully is going to be many, 200 or something. I don't know. There's going to be warm bodies who are ready and willing to draft.
Put me in, coach. Put me in.
That's right. Yeah.
The most important ingredient to a good cube draft.
That's what we need, for sure. A thing to know is that people attending CubeCon are also, per force, going to be attending GameholeCon, our partner convention. So you need to so people who want to attend CubeCon should buy a GameholeCon badge and then buy a ticket to CubeCon as well. So those are 2 separate things. And then GameholeCon, they've got lots of, my goodness, they've got tons and tons of stuff going on, all of which we're going to have access to as well, which is super cool.
And is it one fee to get into CubeCon and then you can draft as much as you want, or is it like there's an entry cost and then there's separate costs for individual pods of the actual sanctioned drafts?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. No, it's one. You just buy your ticket and then you're in and you can do whatever you'd like at CubeCon. Also, we're going to offer day passes. So you can buy a pass for the whole, to attend CubeCon for all 4 days, or you can buy passes by the day. And this could be relevant to your audience if they can only make it for a day. I hope they can make it for even longer. But we're also thinking if people are attending GameholeCon and they haven't heard about CubeCon, this gives them the opportunity to get in on the action on a day.
The last questions we got were, I think it's not the fun thing to talk about, but some people are, of course, worried about the coronavirus. There's nonstop new variants, and we're talking now in mid-July. Who knows what it's going to look like in October? But do you have any news to share on like what CubeCon's approach is to COVID overall?
Yeah, this is an important topic for sure, and it's one that I take seriously and that my colleagues take seriously as well. I still take lots of precautions around COVID, and I feel like sort of a crazy person sometimes when I'm, when I see other people.
Well, you are in Texas, so
I am in Texas. Yeah, right. Maybe I'm not the crazy one, but it's those around me. We're going to take COVID precautions seriously. So the plan is that we're going to require masking. We're going to require proof of immunization, and we're going to require a negative COVID test within the past, 24 hours or something before attending the thing. We do want to be serious about COVID and the possibility of infection spreading. I was getting excited about going to live events again recently. I haven't been to any live Magic events in years. So there was one in Dallas. I live in Austin. I'm in Texas, as you just mentioned. There's one in Dallas last month in early June. I was so excited to go, and they had all these COVID precautions and so on. And then, I'm sure you all saw this, less than a week before the event took place, the organizers said we're relaxing the requirements. And so then that was that. I was right off the thing. So anyway, all that is to say, we're going to take COVID precautions seriously. We aren't going to do any sort of about face on COVID precautions. Or I guess I should say, from my point of view, if we were to do some sort of volte-face on it, then I would not be attending CubeCon personally. So
I got to say, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I mean, we had not talked prior. I didn't know the answer to this question until I just asked it. And I'm really glad to hear that you are actually sticking with the mask mandate. It seems like GameholeCon is likely not going to. They're going to follow whatever the local guidance is. And, who knows what that'll be in October. But I'm really glad to hear that. And for anyone listening, it's like, oh, wearing a mask is so stupid, it's uncomfortable. It is such a small thing to do to just protect people around you. It is like so mildly inconvenient. So if you're out there and you don't want to wear a mask, then I guess don't come to CubeCon. And also if you're out there and you are not going to feel safe, or you think traveling or being around a bunch of people is not going to be safe for you, then you also probably shouldn't come. Like everyone should make their own risk assessment, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. We're trying to make the event as safe as we can. GameholeCon, we don't have any control over what they're doing. They're currently, in our conversations with their organizers, their current thinking is that they're requiring masks. However, as you say, they've also told us that they are going to be following local health guidelines, and if those change, then their requirements might change as well.
Yeah, maybe I misread their website. It was kind of a mealy-mouthed statement I saw on their website the other day about what they were or were not doing. So who knows? But glad to hear that CubeCon is taking a hard line on such a simple thing everyone could do to be healthy with everyone around them. But let's end on a high note, John. What are you most excited about for CubeCon? There's so many things happening. There's roundtables, there's cube drafts, there's seeing people in person you've only known from online. What is the one thing you're most excited about?
Oh wow, well that's a good list already. The academic conference aspect, I'm super excited about.
I love it, John.
Yeah, that's
I'm
really
so
cool.
excited.
I'm excited about that. I'm super excited to meet a bunch of people whom I've only met online, as you say, including you cats. I've talked to you some number of times, in fora like this, but never met face to face. And I'm so jealous when I see pictures of friends who are like going and eating Anthony's awesome ramen or whatever he's working on and cubing and.
Yeah, the only downside is we're going to get to see it, which is going to be great, but you're not going to get to taste Anthony's cookie. You got to come to Baltimore for that.
Yeah,
it's true. The invitation is always open.
Oh, well, thank you. That would be amazing. And then I guess the final thing I'd say is that we have got a whole panoply of different cube environments that we've,
You sure do.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. There's not only the kind of environments that one might expect, like in terms of power level and rarity restrictions and so on, but also just a bunch of oddball cubes. Maybe I don't mean oddball in a pejorative way at all. Like, I'm super excited to play a bunch of these super unique original cubes, and I'm delighted that we're able to host so many of these in one place and give people a chance to, taste the variety that Cube has to offer.
Yeah, I feel like as a baseline, one of the things that I love most about Cube is that it's just like cracking into a brand new format every time. And that's really the most fun part of Limited for me. But beyond that, I feel like a lot of these cubes are not just breaking into a new format. It's like, let's rethink the rules of Magic and think about this game entirely
a lot
different.
of them are like that, Anthony. Many of them are like that, sure. What I really want to do is I just want to get a whole pod of people that have never played the Turbo Cube, maybe ideally never even thought about it or heard about it on the podcast or whatever, and I want to be behind two-way glass, like, in a police interview room, watching them draft it. That would be the most fun thing for me.
Yeah.
Is there a particular cube you're most excited to draft, John?
Oh gosh,
Are you going to be able to be drafting, or are you going to be stuck doing all the hard work during the event?
He's going to be running the symposium, the summit, the Cube Summit at CubeCon.
Yeah, right. I'm sure I'm not going to get to draft nearly as much as I would like, but you better believe I'm drafting some. I mean, that just has to happen. And then some of us, like Jonathan Brostoff, he's already told us, I mean, I'm here if you need me,
He's
guys.
He's going to be in every pod.
Yeah,
he's going to be in every pod. There's no stopping him.
He's gunning for the top table. And
I dare say that J-Bro put on this event so he could win it. Like he's basically building his own gauntlet so he can finally claim the crown. He's like, people are playing online. We got to actually do it in person. I think he's just doing this so he can once and for all get that crown.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, all of this came about immediately on the heels of SCGCon 2019.
Which J-Bro won.
Which he won, right. Justin Parnell had organized this cube component, and he took the crown there. He got his awesome cube-shaped trophy, and he was ready for more, and he was ready for...
He got a taste of that sweet, sweet gold.
Yeah, right. And he's a person who...
Now he's gold crazy.
Yeah. I don't know. Most exciting, I've honestly never drafted a desert cube, so that's something that I'm excited about. We've got one, or maybe was there a second? We've got for sure one and possibly two in the main event, and I would love to give one of those a try. That sounds like a lot of fun.
I think at least one of them is the Amonkar Desert Cube of listener to the show.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on, John, to answer these questions.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see you in Wisconsin in October, and really looking forward to this event. It's like, I am notoriously not a conference person. I love games and stuff, but I would never go to Gamehole Con. No offense to Gamehole Con, right?
Yeah.
I just, not usually for me, but I cannot express how excited I am for this particular event. It's going to be a real thrill.
No. Okay. One small correction. It's not that you're not a conference person. It's you're not a convention person. And our convention...
I'm not a conference person either. I'm a neither person. I don't like going to work conferences either. There's a lot of, in our industry, there's a lot of people that love traveling all over the place to go to various tech conferences. I don't like that either. I just like playing Cube. That's what I'm going to do.
This is going to be convention plus conference, and you're going to get the best of all the worlds, and you're going to love it.
Can't wait.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you all.
Thanks, John.
Good talking to you, John.
I'm going to do a little countdown 3, 2, 1, and on 0, I'm going to ask you and Anthony to both clap so I can very roughly line this thing up.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. 3, 2, 1. That was so fast, Anthony. Were you never a musician growing up? Did you never play a musical instrument?
I played piano for years and years.
Right.
Uh-huh.
I feel like
you freaked me out by telling me
you're
I
in
shouldn't.
your head too much.
Yeah, you put me there.
Also, you tend to clap very quietly. Like the whole point is that it's supposed to be a spike.
I didn't hear the
waveform.
clap.
Should we try again?
No, it's totally fine.
No,
It's
let's try
fine.
again.
It's totally fine. I got
Okay.
it. It's fine. We're just doing it. We're doing it that way. I think we're delayed. I'm going to say hi, John, in 2 seconds, and I want you to respond immediately. Hi, Andy. Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Okay. Okay, well,
There's an echo in the machine.
that worked. That was fine.